Well, it's 10 o'clock, and I know that we're all busy and that we have things to do, but I want to thank you, everybody, again for coming and attending our first experts panel from WY-AI. This, again, this is going to be on applications and ethics. And I just wanted to go ahead and reiterate that this, our WY-AI initiative is part of the School of Computing Faculty Fellows collaboration between the School of Computing and the Learning Design and Technology program in our College of Education. Through the grant proposal and through discussions, we've sort of honed a mission that we want to explore artificial intelligence uses and applications from multiple perspectives, leading to more humane and ethical understanding of the influences AI can have on individuals and societies. And so our expert panel kind of fits into that model. Our goal for hosting these talks and bringing in faculty from within the university, not from outside, but looking inward and looking at the expertise that we're developing here. And we want to gather and highlight the expertise that we have here on campus in the application of AI in teaching and learning and in research. For those of you who don't know me, I'm William Kane. I am an assistant professor in the Learning Design and Technology program here at in the College of Education. My focus has been on how generative AI is sort of changing the face of learning experience design in the programs that I teach. I'm actually head of the master's program and the online instructional certification program. Back in the back, we also have Dr. Maya Williams, who is also part of the Learning Design and Technology program, and she teaches the doctoral stuff. And both of us together are sort of looking at different ways that generative AI can help, not only in the teaching and learning process, but also facilitating and supporting instructional designers, learning experience designers, teachers in K-12 spaces, as well as in higher ed. My particular focus is on prompt engineering and how prompt engineering in and of itself is sort of a cognitive exercise that can promote critical thinking and aspects of heightened awareness in design and learning spaces. So with that said, I'll be moderating today's panel. And now I would like to shift and introduce for opening remarks, Dr. Gabrielle Allen, and she is head of School of Computing. This is for switching out. Oh, actually, let's have a microphone. I should have thought of that in advance. I think we're switching it on.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out today. So, as William said, I'm the director of the School of Computing here. My name is Gabrielle Allen. If you haven't already heard about the School of Computing, we're a new academic unit at the university. We have a focus on applied computing and applications of computing. And in this capacity, we partner really with other computing-related units here at the university. So electrical engineering and computer science, maths and statistics, and other such units to make sure that all of our students have access to a broad range of computing credentials so that we can help prepare them for their careers in any field, which are increasingly dependent on mastering different aspects of computing and data science. We also focus on interdisciplinary research where computing is a core enabler. The school's growing pretty quickly. Just since for 1 year now, we've had our faculty. We now have 19 faculty spread across our tenure track, instructional and research scientists. Many of our faculty have joint appointments with other units in an effort to really bridge computing and the use of computing across the university. One of the things we're doing is working to make sure that we have new academic programs in computing. And you can see the programs that we have for students up here. Some of these, or many of these, already have students enrolled in them. A couple are still in the approval process, working their way through the different approval mechanisms here. Hopefully, all of these will be available for enrollment from next year. If you want to find out any more about any of these programs, for example, the minor in computing that students can take with any major at the university, then we have a table back here that Lorna Chavez is going to be hosting. So if you want to find out information, just go there afterwards. We also have some School of Computing swag. So if you need a yellow water bottle or a new pen, that's also a good place to hit up after the panel. And so one of the core elements of our mission for the School of Computing here is to be an enabling hub for computing at the university. And so this AI event today is exactly what we want to be supporting, encouraging, and be involved in. And as William said, he's actually one of our School of Computing faculty fellows this year. And the Faculty Fellows Program is just one of the mechanisms that we have to reach out across the campus to support students, faculty, and others in pursuing different aspects of computing and building connections with the School of Computing. So this slide shows some of our programs that we have for students and faculty. So look these up. You can find details about them on the webpage. The kind of awards for graduate computing scholars and undergraduate program and faculty fellows are all competitive programs that we run once every year. But also, if you have any ideas or suggestions, just comment. Just come and connect to us. Come and talk to us about what you'd like to know or what you'd like to do. So the plan for the School of Computing was actually made back in 2021. And I think that was before large language models and ChatGPT kind of really exploded. But I think this is a really good example of where the School of Computing can add value to these discussions at the university and can provide this kind of hub to explore computing issues that affect all of us. You know, as everyone knows, AI is changing everything about our lives. It's changing how we teach. It's changing how we learn, how we research, how we just go about our daily lives. And this is not just for engineering and the sciences, it's across every discipline and every field of academics. So it's really affecting everybody. So today's AI Experts Panel is hopefully an inaugural event, like a regular event that we'll have, designed to ignite collaboration across everybody interested in AI here at the university, and also to help promote the school as a hub for a discussion around generative AI and a place to connect people and resources together. I'm really happy that William has been able to as well bring together such a broad range of panelists today from across the university, and a number of our panelists also have connected to the school through faculty fellows or from our advisory board or adjunct faculty. So, and again, great to see everybody here. The innovations around AI are going to start with everybody here in the room, and your ability to connect together, to collaborate together, and to create new uses of AI. So I hope you get a lot out of this event. I want to thank William for organizing it, as well as Lorna, where Lorna disappeared to, has helped a lot with over there with the organizing. Tom Musselman sitting up there, and also Rebecca Austin at the front down here. So thank you very much for putting it together. I know how much work this is, and yeah, looking forward to hearing the conversation.
Okay, am I back on? No. Yes. Maybe. Far out. All right. So, enough said, right? Let's get to the experts panel. Let's hear from our resident experts about their different lines of research. I'm just going to go ahead. Brandon, you're up, since the first slide fell on you. So the first panelist we'll hear from is Dr. Brandon Gellis. All right. This is an AI, it's not an AV panel, so.
In the back. I could just yell. Thank you. I turned it back off. Hello. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for putting this panel together and for a wonderful invitation to participate. Very grateful. I'm introducing myself, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We've got a title slide behind you, so they're giving some biographical sort of information if you need to
Oh
know.
gosh, let's see what.
And if folks want, if you want to stand up and talk, if that makes it a little bit easier.
I feel like, okay. so-
Yes, you are larger than life at this moment.
Oh, great. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brandon Gellis. I am a professor. Thank you for the compliment of doctor, but I'm not there.
Okay.
I have a master's of fine art in design and technology. So I am faculty associate professor of visual communication design in the Visual Arts Department of Visual Arts program. I see many wonderful faces here that I recognize and recent graduate students and whatnot. So it's really great. So I guess to introduce myself, my current research, I just spent the last year living in Israel, which was challenging, if you may be able to presume that. But I was on a fellowship where my goal in my research was to document and interpret street art as cultural, a visual representation and or artifact, if you will, visual language of cultural conflicts. And so 2 days before starting my Fulbright fellowship, a war broke out. Also, if you haven't heard, it changed the path and trajectory of my research and my project in many, many ways. While I was safe and was not as affected as many other people, it still changed my realities. During the evacuation process, I started to think a lot about what could come of this research if I'm not able to be on the ground in the field and actually access field sites that I had planned to document and spend a lot of time interviewing street artists and citizens around. And so I started thinking just one avenue was artificial intelligence. I had already started exploring it over the last year and a half prior, 2 years prior, especially when, a lot of us can think back to like Stable Diffusion when it had to be installed in your terminal on your computer. And now it's all web applications and whatnot, but where you needed a lot more computer power. And so I didn't take a lot of computer power with me abroad when taking children in hand. I had a laptop, and what I did have access to ultimately was coming back to Tel Aviv, and my hosts at the Shankar College of Engineering, Design, and Technology and at Tel Aviv University were able to set me up with some more robust computer systems and some new and novel approaches such as Pinocchio, other methods of using online engines to start to develop AI image interpretation or AI image generation, for example. So part of my project from the creative output of it started to become augmented. And this is what I also do in my class. I use it for augmentation, not for not for original content, obviously. And I began to look at the imagery I was documenting of the cultural conflicts of which was literally exploding around us, no pun intended, at the same moment. And I started thinking about how AI can help me with this process. And I started to flip some of my narratives and think about, okay, this is very dystopian right now. How could I imagine through the methodology of speculative design and speculative thinking, which I use in my classes, because I think it helps students really break out of very linear, very boxed thinking and gets them into a realm of thinking about what if and what could happen and what our futures could be like if things were potentially more idyllic. So I started thinking about how could I use AI to very simply describe back to me images that I was taking from the streets, and then use that textual content to reinterpret and re-envision future landscapes in Israel and in Palestine, for example, and thinking about how the lack of ability for AI to interpret cultural context and to interpret sentimentality. How can it take image data and interpret that and re-envision what an idyllic or alternative future might be for citizens and people living in a very challenging situations with that inability to acknowledge the nuances of war and suffering and pain. Sorry to be so dark. So I started thinking about that. So that led me onto a number of trajectories, ultimately visual creative research trajectories I'm not going to take up too much time about that. But what it did lead me into is what I've ultimately been walking around for the last 3 or 4 years towards my full professor application, is developing an entire manuscript, an entire book. And now it is focused on the actual visual artifacts as they are portray cultural conflict and actual fighting post October 7th, the war beginning. So prior and post, and then re-envisioning future realities through these visual context. And then me writing about that, informed by tremendous amount of scholarship on street art and about people's ability or need to respond in conflict zones when they don't have another avenue, they don't have another voice. So I started thinking a lot about that. So that's my research, if that's okay. And then I am thinking about ethics in there, ethics about human treatment, ethics about how, I'm spinning the word ethics here with regards to AI, but ethics about how the AI envisions actual ethical conflicts and moral dilemmas. And does it acknowledge this in any way? Can I work with it? Can I write my own models? Can I develop bots of my own to consider more ethical considerations, not necessarily looking at the ethics of, is AI stealing or is it taking autonomy, but is it acknowledging or recognizing ethical ramifications? And my teaching, I'm really proud to say that this semester, with tremendous help from my post-undergraduate assistant, Matt, who's sitting here, and colleagues, that I rewrote I rewrote 4 new classes for this year while I was abroad, because I felt I needed to. It was time. I needed to wash myself clean of some drama, as well as not miss a beat with regards to what I'm developing for my students and what I want my students to get out of the world. And a lot of my students are visual artists. A lot of them are within the design realm. Many of them come from other disciplines outside that are really interested in some of the curriculum that we offer. So what I did is I took an upper division typography and narrative development course. So, and I broke it into 3 categories, which aligns with the title of the course, which is text, image, and narrative. And I asked students who were very opposed to it, actually, to start to consider AI technologies and approaches and how we can use this to augment or serve as a springboard or ultimately augment what their original ideas are as they develop a textual, visual, and ultimately an actual narrative structure like a book or 2 instances, role-play board games and so they're creating original content and reinterpreting that or adding to that, helping with their narrative structures, helping flush an idea out into what is the ideal type of structure for a kid's board book about AI? What is the ideal structure for a series of postcards that speak about how AI technologies are being used potentially, and an unfortunate ramification is their use of computing and power, and how does that affect the environment? How does that affect economics? And so students are running in a bunch of other tangents. There have been some snafus. The number one thing that I think students are getting out of this curricular experience is they are no longer afraid of AI. They kind of pity it in that it's got such a long way to go, and they have found so many holes and so many elements and levels of refinement that it does not do for them, even if they ask it in 30 different prompt attempts. So we started with developing prompts and then using ChatGPT to help us ask more questions critically to give us more refined prompt context or considerations. And even with that, with the image generation software, unless they're writing their own models, it's missing the boat in many ways. And so it's teaching the students, one, to not be fearful of it and to not worry that it's going to steal their jobs right off the bat. Again, I talk to them also about it's the user, not necessarily the method, that does untoward things, I suppose.
Okay,
Or is
Brandon,
disingenuous.
I'm just going to stop you right there. I feel like you're moving
I'm getting in too deep.
Well, you're moving into our prompts.
Well, let me stop then. Thank you all very much. And
I don't want to steal the thunder. Okay, yeah. Thank you. No, you're going to have plenty of time to go into that in much more detail. Meredith.
Oh, wow. That's a hard act to follow.
Yeah, look at that.
Well, my name is Meredith Minear. I'm in the Department of Psychology. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. And so actually it's sort of strange for me because I did, classes on neural networks back in the 90s. So kind of knew about this a long time ago and I was like, oh, that's cool, whatever. And then like about 4 years ago, I had a student from computer science who was dabbling in my lab and he's like, I'm taking this cool AI course. I want to use it. And so then he not introduced me to, but we worked in Python to create like a classifier to classify participant responses to topographic maps. And I was like, oh, this is so cool because you could collect data online, but if you get 2,000 images that people have drawn, then you have to have people score that. But if you actually could train a classifier to do that for you, that would help a lot in sort of scoring data and being able to analyze data. But the fun part of it also was when he showed me this, I was like, oh yeah, I remember this crap that back in 93, like, whoa. But that was before ChatGPT even, but I was like, oh, this is neat. And so I've dabbled a little bit, sort of going back and relearning some things. And then when ChatGPT came out, and I do work in virtual reality and augmented reality, and I have a course on it for mostly psychology students. And that was the semester that ChatGPT kind of hit the news. And I have this class full of students who are in a class about technology. And I was like, have you guys heard about this? And they're like, oh, it doesn't matter to us. And I'm like, why? And one student is like, oh, because I'm going to be a therapist. And I'm like, oh, I have some very bad news for you already. And so and we have been using it in my lab. So the game engine I work with has its own language model, Muse, which helps a lot with coding because I tried with ChatGPT and it would give me nonsensical crap. But Muse is actually designed specifically, so it's trained differently. So it actually gives you good information, but you still have to know how to program, at least at this point. What else was I going to say? Oh, I would say the other way that I've actually, without even thinking about it, been teaching about this for years is, so when you do brain imaging, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of studies. It's like, you put someone in the scanner and this area lights up. Like, so for example, when you show people faces, there's an area called the fusiform face area that lights up. But you can also go in the reverse direction. So you could actually, and people have been doing this for some time, where you train a classifier on brain imaging data to then infer what someone is thinking about. Now, and this has been going on, I've taught about this for over a decade. And I would always tell students, it's like, oh, don't worry, it'll never read your thoughts. Like, and they actually have things where it will reconstruct what the algorithm thinks the person is looking at. And it was very crude, but a little scary. And that was 10 years ago. And now it's like, ooh, this might be a little more frightening than we think about. And so this sort of getting into ethics, we don't have any law that covers the contents of your brain. I don't think. I mean, Colorado has done some of that a little bit with EEG and other technologies. And so I've taught this to students and I think they only sort of a little bit understand it. And so I've been starting to think about, well, maybe are there ways that I could actually have a simple example of showing what encoding and decoding is in the classroom so they actually work with it rather than learn about it sort of conceptually, because I think they really do need to understand this technology across many levels. And then just recently, I have a graduate student who's interested in using Deep Dream and other people have done this, so she just has to learn how to use it to create sort of mimic psychedelic experiences. So you would take like a 360 video and then apply Deep Dream to it, and it'll start adding weird hallucinatory kinds of effects. But again, I have students where it's like, you have to learn Python. It's okay. Like it's okay, etc. But I actually just thought I'd share really quickly some data that I collected last year. So that's even ancient at this point. But we were surveying undergraduates, psychology undergraduates mostly, like how are they feeling about digital technologies as well as AI? And just a quick example, about 91% agreed with the statement that digital technologies are valuable to society, and 79% agreed, and this is a sample of almost 400 people, advances in digital technologies bring many social benefits. But then they were given the statement, I hope to find a job using advanced digital technologies, and only 30% agreed with that statement. And then 60% agreed with the statement, with more digital technologies, there will be fewer jobs. So this sort of split approach. And we had another survey with specific questions about ChatGPT, and the majority of them seemed to be aware of it, but hadn't used it or wouldn't agree to using it. And I asked just informally some students about this, and a lot of them seem to be like, well, if I use it, then people are going to know, and they're going to think I'm cheating. So they are kind of afraid of the technology, which is kind of good, because the last thing I'll share, which is very disappointing, a couple of years ago when ChatGPT first came out, we actually had a case where a graduate student used it to write their paper. And it was so convincing that the person who was grading it was like, oh, what an interesting citation. And it had the authors right, and it had and all the information was right. And then he went and looked it up, and of course it wasn't there. It wasn't a real paper. But the fact that one of our graduate students thought that was okay, it definitely indicates that we need a lot more education. And I'm not opposed to using it. I'm very pro using these technologies, as we'll get into discussion, but yeah, they have to do it right. And if they don't learn it, they're going to be behind. That's for sure. So, and there.
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Gorton. I'm in the School of Nursing, and I'm a fairly latecomer in some ways to using AI, because we have the responsibility. This is what you're taught when you're trained as a nurse. You have to catch the mistakes, because if you don't, that patient could die. So we look at this and say, I'm skeptical. How is this going to work? Or how can this help me? So I think in nursing, we've taken this, no AI. But then once you start exploring and learning about it, you're like, oh my gosh, that can be really helpful. Oh my gosh, that could be really helpful. And I was at a conference last week, and it said, well, ask, whatever generative AI you want to create a model. So I said, well, I want to create a model of blood flow through the heart. And I think in general terms, veins are represented by the color blue, and arteries are represented by the color red. Well, the image that was generated for me had the oxygenated, which is in the arteries, and the unoxygenated blood reversed. So if you didn't know anything about it, here you're creating this image that a student may use to study. And you're like, oh, that's kind of scary. So how do we engage in using AI to help our students learn? But then I said, well, create a mnemonic as to the pathway of blood flowing, starting in the, right atrium. And it created a really cool mnemonic. And I thought, well, that's helpful. So, and similarly too, I've used it. I was doing a textbook chapter, and I said, Claude, I need some information about this. And it spewed out all this information. I said, now, Claude, I need the references for that. And I go and check the references. Non-existent reference to what it was telling me was there. So that says, wait a minute, I need to use this skeptically when I ask for where's the evidence. But I do mixed methods research, and I've looked at well-being and resilience in healthcare workers. And I would have loved to have Claude been able to do the summary of my narrative. You know, when we had 500 responses in the first go round, 437 in the second go round at one healthcare organization. I would have loved to be able to just plop those in there and say, give me a summary. But I did that, you know, and so how can we harvest the technology to create time savings for us? And I think that's the piece, you know, but then you say, well, okay, I'm working a shift, or I'm going to the clinic and I'm working a shift, and you enter communication into the electronic health record. So for patients who are in the hospital, you enter all this data. There's stuff running in the background. AI, is this patient a fall risk? They're looking for that based on what's inputted into the system. And is this person on medications that might make them a fall risk or that are contraindicated? So in healthcare, we've had a form of AI running in the background, but we haven't been overtly aware of it. And I think that's the important thing to say is like, does this really work? I mean, I think many of you may have seen the old ads from IBM. Well, ask Watson. And that was an early attempt at looking at multiple things in the healthcare records to help physicians or help providers figure out answers to things they may not see. So I think that's some of the pieces you'll see in healthcare. But even recently, I said, okay, I'm working on a task force, and we're like, okay, we have this list of qualifications. I said, write me a job description. And it was great because it gave us a nice summary, but it was kind of funny sounding. It doesn't sound like the human mind. And I mean, I think Christy Boggs over at ECTL said it well. Take your summary data from your evaluations of your teaching, throw it in there and get a summary. Use it to save time so that you can work on the things that are critical. And I think that's the piece that, at least for me and my colleagues in nursing, we're looking at, we're exploring that. How can it give us a good place to start from? Not be the end piece. And I think, you know, can it help me wordcraft? Or if I insert, you know, throw up a resume and say, I need to write a letter of recommendation for this person, or can you provide me some highlights from this? You can do that and it saves you some time, but you always have to verify. And I think that that's, you know, the fun piece is that we still have to be curious. And we still have to question what are we getting? And we still have to know that when we're using these large language models, they're biased. What's being fed into them is what they're using to generate more and spit out more of the same. So it's a great tool, but you have to use it with caution and curiosity. And what are my boundaries for this?
Now we're going to hear, now we'll hear from Ken Hansen. Oops.
I don't know what you wrote about me.
Well, going backwards.
There we
There
go.
it's good.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So first of all, just thank you so much to everyone who invited me here and made this panel possible. My name is Ken Hansen. I'm an assistant professor of sociology in the Department of Criminal Justice and Sociology. I'm also one of the School of Computing faculty fellows this year, the program that Dr. Allen mentioned earlier today. And I'm the PI in the Human Relationships with Technology Lab. I don't know, a lot of titles, I guess, something about titles begetting more titles. I'm interested in sociological theory. I'm interested in social psychology from the sociological perspective. My students probably know this better than most, but I'm also very interested in deviance and technology studies. So, I'm very interested to be on this panel and hear from people because I'm probably somewhat different than many folks in that I don't actually use AI in any of my research or my teaching. I'm somewhat of a self-professed Luddite, actually. This will probably sound scandalous to the grad students and faculty, but I don't even use a reference citation manager like Mendeley or Zotero. I still do everything by hand. But I am increasingly interested in users. And I'm very interested specifically in people who use transgressive technologies. So my research has looked at things like the sex tech industry and how they're integrating AI into any number of products, whether that's artificially intelligent chatbots that people have sexual and emotional relationships with, sex dolls and sex robots. I have some collaborators in Europe who are running a sex doll brothel that also uses artificial intelligence. But some of the things that I find is that a lot of the sex tech industry is using that in false and misleading ways. So they say that their products are artificially intelligent, but they are not. So there's a bit of a Wizard of Oz thing that's happening in the field. And I'm sure we'll get into all of that in greater detail. But right now I'm working on a book project called Synthetic Selves that's going to pull together, at this point, I don't know, 6 or 7 years worth of research on a number of different people who use this technology, as well as industry representatives, looking at kind of the transnational, the colonial perspectives as well, understanding that sex toys are not just this new thing, that they've existed for thousands and thousands of years. And in many ways, the material sciences that made sex toys and today's most advanced versions possible is an outcome of colonialism in Southeast Asia and South America. So kept keeping it short.
All right. Thank you, Ken. And finally, we'll hear from Mark Peterson.
Yes, I've been here for 17 years. I'm a professor of marketing in the College of Business. I do use artificial intelligence applications in teaching and in my classes, a little bit in research. I was an administrator. I was interim department chair for the management and marketing department in 2022 to 2023. And in the spring of 23, I saw that, hey, the fall semester could very well be different. AI is coming. We need to learn about it. So I was able to gather someone who was more learned in AI, and we had a seminar. It was shared through Zoom. We had about a crowd about this size for that in June of 2023. The response from some of the people in the audience was surprising. We had some people who were very enthusiastic. We had others who were almost on the verge of tears. They were saying that they were going to have to retire, that this is ruining the way that they've always taught. So, I could see the, potential, impact of artificial intelligence. I've been to conferences recently. I've gone to the sessions where different, scholars from schools are discussing what's happening at their university. I have to tell you that when I think about the University of Wyoming, we are unique. Those other schools talk about, well, our school is ignoring it, or we had to kind of twist some arms to get a policy in place. But here at the University of Wyoming, our president, Seidel, the green lights are flashing for everyone. Use this, learn about it. We want to move to the front of the field in terms of understanding artificial intelligence. So it's not surprising we have a session like this here today.
Well, great. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today and sharing their perspectives. We do have some questions for everybody, except for Ken, who doesn't use AI, but he's gonna tell us everything that he knows about it. But I think one of the themes that I think I heard from each of our panelists was the notion of content knowledge, how critical that is in the use and the application of AI. And so for our first prompt, I'm kind of thinking about how content knowledge and how the teaching that we're doing in our own courses, in our classes, and how we're sort of shaping and guiding students in the use of these tools. So just going to this first prompt, what are some of the ways that generative AI is shaping or reshaping the learning experiences in your courses, and how you as an instructor are adapting. I kind of wanted to get everybody's sort of perspective on that and to share it with both any of the grad students or students that are in the audience today, as well as our faculty members. So if you don't mind, maybe we'll just go back the way we came and start with Mark, if that's all right.
Great. Yeah, I had a last spring semester, a student came to me, David Stotzer. He graduated last May, but he was a bright student and marketing major in economics. And one of the things that he wanted to do was he was in the honors college. So he had an honors project that he wanted to do. Well, he had an interest in the national parks. And so he and I, came on the idea of how will the introduction of electrical vehicles impact the national park system in our country. And so he used artificial intelligence. I had to encourage him. So he kind of felt like that wasn't his idea. I said, no, go use AI. And so he used it for brainstorming. And so the way he did it, I think, is a super way to illustrate how it can really inform a project of discovery that he embarked upon. So he used AI, and basically he asked for what are the 5 principal dimensions that need to be addressed in introducing electrical vehicles to the national parks. And, instantly AI gave him 5 dimensions, and he evaluated them and said, those sound really good. I'm going to, on my own now, go and write about and investigate and research those 5. They had to do with things like electrical bikes, which can now go very much further into the wilderness areas, and should they be allowed to be there, charging stations, how that's going to play out, what's the timeline for introducing charging stations for automobiles and other vehicles in these national parks. So it was a very, I think, successful project. And David is now embarked upon he's pursuing the priesthood. So he's in seminary in Moline, Illinois. But I think it was just a great example. Last week, I had an example. A student, instead of doing brainstorming, they did what I call feign storming, which is cheating, which is copy and pasting. And so I had an in-class writing assignment to write about nuclear microreactors. So that's what we're considering in our sustainable business practices class. So this student actually came to class, saw that we were engaged in writing, left, and then she submitted an assignment online that night. Now, when I interacted with her about this, she said, she had intended to do it, and write it on her own, but a friend called her up and said, hey, can you go ice skating with me? It'd be great fun if you could go. And so she had to do it in 10 minutes. And so she just asked 2 questions to AI and copy and pasted them and submitted it. So when I compared that to her previous work, it was far better. So, she didn't seem to be apologetic or contrite. It was just kind of like, well, this is what you wanted, and I gave it to you. So I guess with regards to student culture, that's another thing. Also, AI seems to be able to help novices, attain parity with those that are very far into the field. This was an international student who probably for language purposes this is more difficult than maybe for English as a first language student. However, the student that wrote the best in my class was actually from France. And so English is not her first language. So I guess in terms of the intellectual development, I think we'll keep coming back to that in our program today is, here at the University of Wyoming and other universities, we're about developing the neural networks between somebody's ears, okay? And that neural network is what we're focused on here. And AI is very useful for harnessing neural networks around the globe, but that's kind of a different endeavor. I've also, another positive assignment was I had the students examine the NFL teams and their sustainable business practices programs. And so put them into pairs. They did research. I encouraged them to use AI And they were able to do a lot of comparisons, and they came up with some fantastic insights, which we actually briefed to the vice president of sales for the Baltimore Ravens football team, and he was impressed. So I can see that, you know, it can be used in that way. I've also done an assignment. It's I call it AI turbocharged career consulting. So turbocharging, the engineers in the room here know that what this is that for an internal combustion engine, you would take the exhaust and then route it to the intake part, which would turn a turbine, and it would suck in oxygen or air more rapidly. And so it would put that in the combustion chamber. And so you get more power. So by analogy, that's what this AI turbocharged career consulting project is about. So it's very simple. The student has to bring an output to me in my office, and we will discuss it. But the output is have AI choose your career field, but importantly, put a location where you'll begin your career, and have it chart a path, a career path for you. And so it does that. And and what this allows is now there's a platform. And somebody asked me, well, how many did they bring in? I said, well, they always bring in just one. So I think what it can do is maybe if healthcare was your interest and you see what it looks like, you would eliminate that if that wasn't your preference. And so it rapidly moves students along to at least have a conversation about something that's meaningful to them. I did this for one of our athletes, Cole Goodbow. He's given me permission to share about this, but he was a defensive tackle on our football team last year. And we did it for the marketing job that could be done in Wisconsin, where he's from. And it actually gives little bubbles where these people are hiring now. So that was enlightening. I know from interacting with Cole that his real dream job would be playing defensive tackle for the Green Bay Packers football team. So I had him, or I did this, and we did it in front of the class, but what would it take to make the team for the Green Bay Packers, given that you're a defensive tackle at the University of Wyoming? And so it starts giving you the results of the, well, it starts off by saying you need to have agility, strength, and resilience to be a defensive tackle in the National Football League. But then it starts giving the statistics for the current defensive linemen on the Green Bay Packers football team, what their 40-yard dash time was at the NFL Combine, how many repetitions they did with 225 pounds in the bench press, how many tackles did they have for loss in their senior season at UCLA. And so it's immediately there in front of you. You can see what the standards are for you to make. And so there's also a related task. We had it develop a letter of introduction for Cole to the vice president of player personnel for the Green Bay Packers. It got everything right, except it used the previous vice president of player personnel. He had left 6 months ago, and the current one needed to be adjusted. So it can do these related tasks, but actually, after I demonstrated this and reading more about AI, I understood that there's this transformative dimension that AI can be used for. And that is, I want to make the Green Bay Packers football team as a defensive lineman. How can I increase my strength by 25% in the next 6 months? How can I reduce my time in the 40-yard dash by 5%? And then it gives a 2-page, path for doing that. But then it's, no, tell me day by day what this would look like. And so it begins in the morning, you wake up, how you hydrate, what you do, go to work out, come back, protein drinks, all these things, the kind of meal that you'll eat at lunchtime, all around. So that's that potential transformative dimension that AI can provide. And so I think that's what we really need to harness. But there's a price to pay for that. Somebody's got to do that. So Cole would be the one to do that. So this has been a very successful exercise with students. And really what if I had a slide I could show, I would show Patrick Mahomes from the Kansas City Chiefs and Andy Reid, their coach with the walrus type mustache. Okay. They're not looking at each other. They're together shoulder to shoulder, like peering out at something on the football field. So Andy Reid is a baby boomer like me, Patrick Mahomes is Gen Z, like many of our undergrads. And so now we're on basically we're together working on the same project. And so it comes as a result of this AI platform that it allows us to kind of work together and collaboratively on that.
We're focusing on education, right? You know, the French philosopher, one of my favorite at least, and social critic Michel Foucault once said that one writes to become someone other than who one is. And so when I think about sociology as a discipline, we're largely invested in changing not just how students see the world, but also how students view themselves. So to achieve these goals, you know, my classrooms and a lot of my colleagues' classrooms in sociology focus very heavily on reading, on writing, on editing, and revising, and taking an active role in using and creating new linguistic solutions to solve some of the most deep and complex human issues today. One of the questions I like to ask my students is, can you really know what you think about something until you're forced to articulate it for yourself? You know, another example is in my sociological theory class, we read a fairly heavy amount of Karl Marx, who is, you know, he gets a lot of flack for various things. But I tell my students, like, do you really want to live your whole life just believing what other people tell you about Karl Marx, or do you want to read it for yourself? You know, I don't really care if you agree with him or disagree with him, but I want you to at least be able to articulate your opinion in him based on your actual understanding of what he said because you read it and engaged with it. So when I look at AI and how it's being used in writing assignments and in the classroom, sometimes I worry that it is the final nail in the coffin of the much larger and deeper trend of the neoliberalization of the university, in particular our incentive structures as faculty. You know, I agree with what Karen said earlier, that if we're going to be using AI in any respectful or ethical way, that we have to focus more on the process of work and not as much on the output that it's able to create. But the university, unfortunately, is, you know, from a financial perspective, but also ideologically, quite literally invested in end products. You know, we're interested in the credentials that we create for students, the grant dollars that we're able to attract, the impact factors of our publications, and other quantitative metrics that usually don't capture much of the process that goes into that labor. But I don't blame AI itself. I think AI is ultimately just a product. And like all products and technologies, how people choose to use it is going to be shaped by the larger structural forces that are at play. You know, like I already said, in the academy, we see some of those institutions at work. Other trends like pivoting towards common sense majors, you know, creating more economically viable trajectories for our students, other buzzwords that we like to attach to things to find ways to sell our credentials to the highest bidder. Those are strong forces in, you know, faculty's lives and graduate students' lives and our undergraduate students as well. So in my classrooms, I'm really trying to pivot towards having students understand that education is not something one has, it is something that you do. And I also don't blame my students for using AI. You know, I think that they have a lot of stressors in their lives that act as structural factors that push them and incentivize them to use AI. They've got bills, they've got jobs. Most of my students are working one, if not two jobs. They've got complex family issues. And as some of my colleagues working in medical sociology and sociology of mental health have shown, increasingly diverse and complicated mental health and body image issues. So when they live in an environment and they're a part of an institution that says that all that really matters is the degree and the grade, why not use the simplest tool to get it? Why bother to take the time to do the work and engage in the process? So, you know, in terms of how I'm actually changing my classroom to do this, the shift has been pretty incremental, because I feel like I'm trying new things and testing them out and kind of tweaking as I go. But I'm pivoting towards more in-class graded written work, which means that I do have to read my students' handwriting, which can be troubling at times, but, more in-class paper exams, more scaffolded assignments that break down the process of research or break down the process of learning into easy digestible pieces and kind of walking them through it. I like to think, maybe this is somewhat of a romantic notion, but of my classroom as a learning laboratory where discussion is really central to the experience. And I'm looking into ways to find more ways to grade discussion as well. And I'm hoping to also pivot towards more experiential learning, which is maybe a difficult thing to imagine in sociology, but I think about things like in my social psychology class, we read Irving Goffman's work, Asylums, where he talked about the effect of institutionalization on the psyche. But what if we actually read that in an asylum and walked the hallways and imagined what it would be like to be institutionalized? Or if when we're reading Discipline and Punish and Deviant Behavior, we don't just read it in the classroom, but we actually go to a prison and discuss the history of torture in Western society. So, my goal is to reorient my classes almost entirely to focus on process instead of product, so that by the time we get to a final term paper, that actual end product is not so important to the grade, and it's the things that we did to get there. That is, of course, all dependent on whether or not the neoliberal university structures will allow me to do that. It's hard to do that with large class sizes that are not ideal for student learning outcomes, but they are certainly good for financial goals.
Thank you. I mean, so nursing, we have external accreditation standards, and those have just been approved recently. And one of our new standards is Standard 8. Come on. And it talks about informatics and healthcare technology. So that used to be embedded in one of our standards, in one of our essentials for education, that you had to do this. So now they pulled it out and said, wait a minute, this is important. So I think we've been given, in a way, a green light to be able to say, how am I going to use technology and how am I going to use communication and information to provide care, gather data, form information to drive decision-making and support professionals as they expand knowledge and wisdom for practice. So in that statement of our what we have to do, we're given the green light, use technology. But what are the rails that okay, I can do this. Now, how do I do it responsibly? How do I make sure I set up the assignment so that the students, at first this was like, oh my gosh, they're going to cheat using AI. Can't have this. But how do you set up an assignment that requires them to reflect critically on a situation and provide their input into what they would do with something? So how do you say, okay, you can use these tools, search for your references, check them out, see if it can help you. But how, again, do we make sure that they're able to build and that what we're doing is actually assessing their knowledge and not, okay, can I just ask the Google? I mean, because how many times have all of you been in a classroom, and I know I've done it, nobody knows the answer or they don't want to say. I said, okay, you all have computers, ask the Google. So that is a way, and you think about it, ask Siri, what am I asking? And not realizing that it's AI generating that information and running that query for us, that we're like, oh my gosh, we use it every day in our classrooms, but I didn't realize how much I used it in my classroom. I'm in the process of redesigning a course. I'm like, well, let me just ask, let me do a search. I'm using that to search. And then it's making suggestions. Oh, by the way, that's AI running in the background. So again, I think it goes back to, wow, no, we're not going to use this in nursing because we have this responsibility to, oh, wait a minute, it can be a helpful tool to help us get started on projects. For the graduate students who are working on their Doctor of Nursing practice degree, they have to do a quality improvement project in that degree. So how can generative AI help start them on that project or help make recommendations on what other areas that they need to look at or consider when they start their project because they're novices in doing this. We supposedly, as the faculty members, have a little more of experience. So how can we guide them so that when they graduate, they know how to use this tool responsibly? And I think that that's what we're really grappling with in nursing is how do we use this in a responsible manner that allows our students to understand both the good things and the bad things, but then allows them to take that first pass work and create their own work. And if they do that, they're not plagiarizing. They're not plagiarizing from the generative AI that they've been using, and how do we make sure that when I'm designing my learning lessons and experiences, how do I make sure that I'm assessing what they're going to assimilate from the readings and the videos and the mini lectures, that I'm asking a good question that requires them to use all of their learning and demonstrate that they have understanding of this. And you can design assignments like that. So I think that's the big thing. How do we design the assignments? And like you said, how do I make sure that the work is done in small increments to help them come to a finished product? And that's the fun thing for me is looking, okay, I like curriculum. I'm a geek with that, but how do I scaffold this and help them learn? So how do I scaffold and help them learn about, AI and other things that we will see and we do see in healthcare using AI in various ways? And I mean, it's fun. I have a responsibility to help my students be able to be successful when they graduate. This is one of the things that they're going to come in contact with. So we as faculty have to figure it out.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to say I was smiling because Endel Tolding, who was a famous memory researcher, he passed away recently, but he would also say the Google. So he would just say, ask the Google. That's what Endel would say. So that's just took me back a little bit. I guess I'll go in a slightly different direction in terms of the prompt is like, how is it reshaping learning experiences in your courses? And first, I think I'll say something that's probably sacrilege to a lot of educators is that I've hated papers for years and student writing has just gotten worse and worse. And then just forcing them to jump through a hoop of regurgitating something. And then they hate it, I hate it, we all hate it. And so I really started moving away from, a lot of writing a while ago, but I still want them to engage the material, to share information. And then once ChatGPT came around, I was like, okay, well, definitely writing's off the table because I don't want to be policing them. And yes, they're under extraordinary pressures. They want to do well. Everyone else, quote, everyone else is using it, et cetera. And then it just made it even worse. So I had been shifting towards having students do podcasts, infographics, videos, work in teams, do group work instead. And now even with AI, with generative AI, I'm like, you can use it, just explain how you used it and credit it. Like what did you use it for? And actually most of them aren't using it. And I'm like, actually, maybe you should. And another thing I really want my students to do, actually, I was just thinking about this, is a lot of them are frantically, so I teach more biological psychology, things that students are not familiar with. There's a lot of information and they're just frantically trying to copy down everything. And I'm like, stop, get the slides, like, calm down. And now I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe I should just tell them, like, here's this AI note taker. You can work in tandem with that. So you can pay attention, ask questions, and not be afraid you're quote unquote missing anything. So I would encourage that kind of use. In addition to writing, probably one of the reasons writing is so poor is that students don't read. They just won't read. Like even physical coercion, they won't read. And so I guess I was using AI without even thinking about it. I do want them to read. And by the way, I do want them to write, by the way. It's not that I want them to be illiterate. I've moved to low stakes, more personalized writing where, it's short, So hopefully that lowers the incentive, like, why ask a chatbot when it's something I could write, though I still had a student do that. It was before ChatGPT. And again, it was something very personal, but it was so weird. And then I Googled it and I could tell it had been pulled from different places. And I wasn't mad at him and I didn't fail him. I was just like, dude, this is lame. Like, what chatbot did you use? And then he never did it again. And actually, he liked me so much, he took all my courses and et cetera. Let's see, I sort of lost my thought there. But I started using Perusal, which is a social reading platform developed by physicists at Harvard. And so you can post articles or textbooks, and then students can annotate it and then respond to each other, et cetera, which is very cool. It's a great idea, but now you have all these responses, you have to do all this grading, blah, blah, blah. But they built into Perusal, and it's been getting better and better. And they actually just had a sort of Perusal-centric conference on AI, and they had, what's his name, Wolfram guy there. I mean, they had a lot of AI leaders there as well. And they have an AI that will at least do some simplistic grading. So one of the things you could worry about is that's, oh, you have to write 3 questions, and then they just write 3 questions in the introduction. And it will downgrade you for that. So you have to sort of scatter your responses throughout the article. And it's getting better and better. And I even explained the rationale of the grading to the students, like, this is what this thing is going to be looking for. So I don't have to do all of that. I mean, I do love reading the responses, but in small classes, that's possible. But say you're using this for a large class, there's literally no way. But it will also do confusion reports for you. So it will analyze all the responses and then say, here's where students seem to really don't understand this article. So it will do a lot of that work for you. So that makes it so it's feasible that you can use the tool, because otherwise you're going to be overwhelmed, and then students will figure that out and that sort of stuff. So I think that was a way that I was, let's see, a little confusion. Oh, it also suggests discussion prompts for you, et cetera. So it does a lot of good stuff that helps you, again, be more efficient as a teacher. I've seen a few things on like using ChatGPT to generate a larger test bank so that you can put more practice questions out there. I haven't started this yet, but I think one of the biggest uses I've seen that I thought was really interesting, and credit to my alma mater, Michigan, they have this huge Gen AI initiative there. So they have their own version called Maisley that gives you access to fancy ChatGPT and Dolly and Llama and all these various models, and they're encouraging everyone at the institution to use it. And one of the things that one of their videos was talking about was using it to create like AI chatbots that can interact with a student and give them quick feedback on questions, and sort of tailor the feedback to the particular type of student. And that's hugely important because I think our students really need feedback. And we, as faculty, have multiple jobs. And sometimes our TAs are not as knowledgeable. And so these chatbots could be better. But then just lastly, to conclude, I'm also kind of a Luddite in a weird way as well. So one of the things that, and I was already headed in this direction, but I think that generative AI and the possibilities for cheating, in a sense, quote unquote cheating, just push me even further into doing more hands-on learning or experiential learning. Shout out to the LAMP program. They do a wonderful job. And I think students, and then there's no way for them to cheat. It's like you're literally putting sticks into a ball and they're interacting with each other. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can offer. I know we're very big on online programs, but I think there are a lot of students who are hungry to come in and interact with each other, interact with you. And so actually having these like low tech kinds of things is very exciting for them. But at the same time, yes, I do want to train them to use these tools because yeah, if they go out into the job market, like I can use sticks. I'm like, yeah, no jobs for you. All right, but I'll hand it off to Brandon. Try to make him laugh.
How do I follow sticks? That's awesome. So, um, so I feel positive about AI for many reasons. I am critical of it for just as many reasons. But with regards to the prompt, how is it reshaping like my curricular and learning experience? I think something that I really want to hone in on is that I think AI helps drive innovative pathways of thinking, helps drive people to think differently than what they currently think. And to expand upon that, with regards to students and not wanting to read, or let's just criticize millennials as we always do, and don't have the energy or the desire to sit there and read as much or engage as much. I think using AI methodologies as a springboard for critical thinking, even though we comment and we say it's not good at critical thinking per se, or doesn't encourage it, I actually think using it as a springboard to get students thinking further empowers them to have a voice when they are normally sitting there on their phone, or used to post-COVID, during COVID, finishing high school, starting college in a room with a computer without human engagement. So how do we get them out of these boxes? How do we get them into the world? I think it helps with creative thinking. I don't see it, this is a very general statement, but I don't see it too differently from a student spending an hour on Pinterest looking for creative influences. We have a lot of faculty within the visual arts that don't want students looking at any sort of visual references prior to engaging with a prompt or a project. I don't know how to limit that from people, so I'd rather get ahead of it and work with them and facilitate deeper, more critical thinking about influences, and how, one, laying out ground rules, how not to plagiarize, how to properly cite and reference. It's actually the cite and reference generation, past checking that it's accurate, has actually helped my students engage more in research, because they don't want to go to the library. I don't want to call anyone lazy. It's cold. They don't want to go to the library. They don't want to spend the time to, some students don't spend the time to look on the library site to even look up references and think about reading them online or watching a video. So similar to finding references in Wikipedia, which I also don't think is necessarily the best and most accurate method, by generating references in ChatGPT, it gives us a starting place to start look at those references. And often I have students find and say, okay, now go find that book, or at least excerpts from that book that you can read online if it exists, which most times it does when we're looking, but I'm encouraging students in alternative methods of conducting research. So at the very least, I'm not trying to poo-poo it. I'm trying to find a way to engage with it. So laying ground rules about originality and about the uses and expectations associated with AI. For me, in design is a very applied approach. It's very technical. I think that AI often can steer us in the right directions by prompting, can steer us in the right directions for where to find online videos, online demos, other resources that they can pull from conferences or design workshops that they may not have had access to already, and then learn from those, bring those forward to share those with students, and then we unpack them together. We discuss them together. We find new resources that way. I mentioned innovative pathways. I think that it has helped me as a teacher save time with my own research, but specifically in teaching, helping me identify more concise prompts or projects for students that may have been a lot more romantic, or how I speak, very illustrative. So being a little bit more succinct. And that has awarded me more time to engage with my students on hands-on experimentation. I think it helps empower creative skill building. I'm speaking from a visual artist in a design realm. I don't think this same access applies to other disciplines, nor do I think it applies to many other disciplines within the visual arts. I don't think you're going to find as much content that is beneficial if you're a ceramicist. It also helps my students think outside the box to envision the potential of, again, I mentioned speculative narratives. It allows students the ability and the power to think about what could be if they don't like what's currently happening. It also can give them little bits of feedback and content that helps them think about how to direct a project or a research question into a different angle or unpack it differently than they already think they will. So I think it opens up potential for people. I think it's also helped being a collaborative tool. I said it helps also empower conversation and critical thinking to some regard, to some degree. That I think also helps them think more, be more willing to engage with others. Last couple things, creative enhances in creative exploration. Design and design thinking and design as a methodology is rooted in ideation and iteration. You test, you come up with an idea, you think about what someone else needs in order to solve a problem for them, not based on your own personal interpretations or what you think their problem is or what you think their remedy should be. So I think AI has helped my students prototype and ideate more. And it's really helped with more experiential hands-on learning. There's a lot more I could talk about, but I also think it's opened up students' interest and willingness to think multidisciplinarily, to think about things that they aren't necessarily exposed to from me or other people or from what they would, how they would normally look into ideas or research ideas. It prompts them with other syntax, it prompts them with other scientific or scholarly notions that then hopefully encourages them with me helping to encourage them to go deeper into that and bridge across campus.
I know for my own courses, and I teach mainly asynchronously online, and I teach with adult learners who are in graduate programs, either at the master's level or the doctoral level. I deal with maybe about half are in-service teachers. They're in K-12 environments, and they're sort of coming to grips with AI and students being able to have access to it. I know for my discipline, there's never been an educational technology tool quite like generative AI. The power, the multifaceted use of generative AI, the fact that it's so accessible that anybody can just sort of log in and even have free access to it. We've never, most educational technologies in my field have always come with a price tag. There's always been something behind it. I think the last big one was maybe the internet. That was, and there was a lot of hand wringing over that. One of the things that I've been stressing for my students who are either they're going to be teaching or they're going to be in corporate training environments or in the military, these kind of scenarios, I've been telling them you need both hands on the wheel. And when you're thinking about generative AI, and by both hands on the wheel, I'm talking about content knowledge and developing expertise in a particular field, in a particular discipline. And the other one is the critical thinking piece. And I think that was what I heard from a lot of the panelists right there, is to be able to sort of critically examine and think about the outputs that are coming in, and to be able to be holistic in that critical thinking and think about larger issues about where AI is taking us, maybe societally, environmentally, and so on. So I hope that's a nice segue into sort of the next prompt that's going to be talking about ethical challenges. And I'd like to, if we can, sort of keep it a little bit briefer this time, And maybe, and, so that we have about 30 minutes for Q&A. I don't know if anyone's developing their own questions out there, but the prompt is, what ethical challenges do you think are most pressing when it comes to using generative AI in your discipline? And this is where we're going to sort of leave teaching and learning behind. And I kind of really want to dig into your fields per se, and really kind of get to have you sort of share those perspectives with us, so that we know, not just from a big sort of, we know, perhaps we know a lot or maybe too much about plagiarism, about how students are interacting from it. This is sort of from your professional outlook when you're looking at your own discipline. And Rainer, we'll just go back, we'll just do it.
I will be quick. First of all, for everything I said about the positive implementation of AI in my classroom, I have just as many concerns, but that wasn't the question. So now we're at that question, which is, I agree with a lot of what has been said so far. So I'm going to keep it really succinct, even though I have 5 pages of notes. I think that with regards to academia in my field and across the spectrum of academia, I think there are ethical questions about critical engagement, and whether or not people are aware of when you get content from AI, it's often very generalized from generative AI. And are we aware of deeper, bigger issues and or accuracy? But are we also aware that this is could potentially be guiding us down a rabbit hole that is counterintuitive or might ultimately be discriminatory towards others? So I think what's important to this discussion is being aware of discussing biases and general ideas of ethics. Critical thinking, I think there's a concern about the loss of critical thinking, and in my field, critical making, which are hand in hand. In that there is the lack of the nuances of individuality and creative brushstroke, for a lack of better terminology. I think they still, AI models, generative AI models specifically, still really struggle with understanding cultural context, as I mentioned in my own research. But when we're unpacking conceptual ideas and critical thinking and narrative development in my courses, I want students to be able to think from a humanistic perspective and not a robotic or mechanized perspective. Again, limited individuality. It is not as much the case now, in my opinion, with generative AI, but earlier technologies were a lot more costly on the user and were not as accessible. Machines needed to be stronger and more robust when servers weren't necessarily involved as they are now. The impact on the environment, the impact on originality. It also doesn't really engage in critical feedback process. And so that, I think, still needs to rely on human interaction, getting critical thinking and interesting ideas that are not just coming out as very generalized bullet pointed statements, for example. And then last one or two is the loss of hands-on, the loss of doing things on your own, or the building of relationship between us as mentors with our students. That can be lost if we are not accessed as potential resources. So when we do the Googles, when we go on to Google, and I agree with you, it is absolutely methodologically, all of these advances, Googling, shopper helpers online, fintech tools online, these are all AI. Most of them are trained and not necessarily as generative, but I think that there are greater concerns with generative AI potentially steering people down more personalized, deeper holes or pathways that are harder to come back from, if that makes sense.
I guess I'll just talk about 2 things really quickly. One is what I know people are worried about. So I've seen journals are like, you can't use AI, a generative AI to write part of your paper, or you can, but you need to be very and explicit about it, or whatever. And actually, I don't have a problem with some of that, because a lot of academic writing sorry to hate on writing. I actually love writing. And, but yeah, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, these models do kind of what we do in a sense. They just sort of regurgitate the most common things. So when people are writing introductions, there's a lot of boilerplate and that takes up a lot of time away from actual thinking. So I actually don't have as much of a problem with that. And I'm fairly certain I've already reviewed some papers that have some AI writing. And honestly, it's probably better. So I appreciate that. The bigger ethical challenge I see is in many fields of science, we already have, people who fake their data. They used to do it in a very, old fashioned way. But there are people whose careers, they got away with faking so much data and now they're sort of being caught. And probably with AI helping. But the flip side of that is I could see people using generative AI to create more convincing databases or data sets that confirm their hypotheses that are going to be harder to detect. And because now it's like people go into Excel files and like, oh, this was copied and pasted. Aha, we've caught you. You are fired from Harvard. But I think smart people are going to be able to use some of these tools to create very sophisticated data sets that are going to be harder to catch for fraud. And I think that's going to be a huge problem. And then just briefly, ethical concerns of destroying the environment to make a fun card for my dad's birthday is probably up there as well. So
Well, thank you. I mean, some of that academic writing is boring at the beginning. So can I use a help? Some journals are saying you can say, yes, I used it to help, but this is my own work intellectually. So in healthcare, the ethics of using generative AI to create a note on a patient or documentation can kill that person. That's our big ethical issue. If we don't understand the ramifications, because when we see what we call a sentinel event or a critical event that happens to a patient that causes harm or even death, we see that it happens because of poor communication. Somebody didn't write it down, somebody didn't communicate, and we use these electronic health records as a means of communication. So if I go in there and write something that isn't true because, oh, my generative AI said I could do that, that's crazy making. That's scary for us. I was just reading some things for the class I'm developing. Nobody noticed that a patient had no sensation in their lower legs for 4 days. And the physicians and the short coats and the long coats and the residents and the fellows and the attendings, they didn't catch it. The patient is permanently paralyzed. So that's the ethical issue for us. If you don't document it, you didn't do it, is what we tell our students. And so what is the documentation that you're creating? Are you creating something using generative AI to cover your butt because you did something wrong and you can't admit it? You have to own your decision-making process. So I think it's important to understand that, yeah, those are the concerns that we have in healthcare. We want people to use their minds. And I was at another meeting and Timothy Chua from Stanford spoke and he said, you have to teach curiosity. How do we teach our students to be curious, to explore, to explain? And the other statement that I really liked of his was, we have the opportunity in higher education, in any sort of education, to warp young minds, but we must do it responsibly. We're challenging the way that they're thinking and we're challenging them to be independent and critical thinkers. But how do we harvest this and how do we teach them to be truthful? And I think another ethical issue is, when we look at social determinants of health, who has access to the internet and who has access to these tools to know how to use it so that the databases become balanced? Because ethically, we're creating a more narrow, homogeneous system when we don't have everybody participating in this. And I'll also say, where are we getting the water from for these big AI generators? Where are we getting the power from 24/7 for these data centers that are generating. It's a big concern. And in healthcare, what do we do to the environment impacts our patients and our clients and our communities. So we have to pay attention to that. And we have to educate our students to the ethics of action as a consequence.
Oh, this is the one I've been waiting for. I don't know where to begin. I guess I'll try and pull from a couple of things I wasn't able to touch on. But, just to reiterate what folks have already said about the environmental costs, I think we need to be crystal clear about what's happening. We are destroying the earth to make fun images and cartoon pornography. And it's all too easy to justify that or pretend that it's not happening when some of the worst environmental costs are offshored to people that live in different countries, right? I mean, the vast majority of the technology, the iPhones and iPads and computers that we have, when we get tired of them, we send them over to India and China for children to walk in garbage fields barefoot and expose themselves to harsh chemicals to try and reclaim some of those precious metals and rare earth metals to be used in the iPhone 17 or 18 or whatever we're moving on to. So, I mean, at a global scale, AI is very troubling. So, I think to borrow a phrase from Giles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, I think culturally our entire approach to technology is somewhere between a capitalist hellscape and schizophrenia. We are so excited and marvel at technological innovation, but we somehow don't see that as at all connected to increasing rates of mental health issues, more and more teens reporting that they feel lonely, people being algorithmically sorted into relationships. So it's an interesting time to live, to say at least. But I will just kind of press maybe more specifically on the sex tech field, because that is where I am an expert, I guess. Kind of weird to consider myself an expert in sex tech, but the main ethical questions that I wrestle with day to day in my research, and I think other people in my field are as well. One, does using sexualized AI technologies actually cure or help people who have mental health issues like depression, anxiety, personality disorders, and so on? Or does the use of these technologies actually exacerbate the pre-existing and underlying issues by further isolating vulnerable people? Two, to what extent do these technologies promote harmful ideas about intimate relationships by creating artificially intelligent partners, sex dolls, and sex robots that are designed to meet user demands, even if those demands are abusive or illegal? Third, what potential do sexualized chatbots have in providing useful and factual sexual health information? And if Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation get their way to regulate the means by which sexual health information is circulated vis-a-vis the revival of the Comstock Act, which they have suggested, how will those limitations now affect companies and shape the content, the sexual health content in particular, that users are able to access? And all of these questions are only going to become more complicated as we increasingly move towards a surveillance-driven neoliberal state that's profiting from users' quite literally intimate data, their sexual data alongside mental health information and personal information being sold to the highest bidder without their consent. More troubling, I think, is that as certain sexualities and sex practices are scrutinized or maybe even criminalized, to what extent will companies cooperate with law enforcement agencies in bringing sexual others to trial? So something I tell my sex tech scholars when I go to conferences is, you are all the dewy-eyed technological utopia futurists that frame sexual wellness as this agent of sexual liberation because it's able to provide reliable, accessible, novel sexual content to millions of people because either they're too humiliated to ask a doctor about a symptom they're experiencing, they're afraid to be themselves in public because of violence against sexual and gender minorities, or maybe they have some other vulnerability like a disability or a mental health issue. But are we really able to honestly say that we can be liberated by for-profit companies that in the end are going to put profit over people and compliance over ethics?
in research, there's a website now called Retraction Watch. I think it's been out there about 20 years. So it was founded by some researchers. Yeah, Meredith's going, yeah, I think it began in psychology or something. But anyway, and they've been collecting these incidents and publishing them of, dubious results or, fudged data. And turns out that I guess over the years, reusing data is like one of the primary ways that researchers go wrong. So that's been happening before artificial intelligence. So really what the reusing of the data is that the same paper is submitted and published someplace else. And so I did see that recently in my field where my doc student and I looked at for a reference, we were looking at it and then we went to another one and it said this has been retracted, and because the article also appeared in another journal. So, that is, I guess that's like copying and pasting. That's like feign storming. There's also in Retraction Watch, this issue of hyper prolific researchers. So it's not just doing like the average output. They have to be way above average. And so this happens mostly in biomedical science, life sciences, and chemistry. And the reasons, according to Retraction Watch, is that there are high stakes there in the competitive nature of the field. This morning in the Los Angeles Times, there's an article about the University of Southern California. One of their prominent researchers in neuroscience has been suspended indefinitely because of this pattern of doubtful data. And it goes to the point here that Karen was mentioning, that he's focused on the brain-blood barrier. Okay, so what his insights are about is supposedly developing pharmaceuticals to address people who are living with brain cancer, just and so that's a problem. Okay, so you can see that the ethical issue there, it's really felt. In my field, we have qualitative research. Ken Hansen actually is a qualitative researcher, and I taught qualitative research methods at the University of Texas at Arlington for 10 years to graduate students. I'm a quantitative researcher, but to fill in, I did that. And actually it was quite exciting to use ethnography, go to the field, spend time with consumers in their context, and make interpretations later. So this kind of research is slowly done. There has been an incident in my field where somebody actually faked data, that they said that they spent a summer talking to people and they did not. But these researchers, and probably Ken is one like them, that the data becomes like their children. They're proud of it. They work with it all the time. They just want to cut off the conversation here with you so they can go back and get into that data more and get insights that they hadn't seen before. So I guess that issue of slowly done research is maybe in this new age of AI has maybe more value than what it had before.
I just want to thank all of our panelists again here today. In my imagining of how this panel would go, this this has been really great in terms of the breadth and scopes of perspectives and the depth of the conversation that's been going on. So I just want to thank everybody again. We're going to switch now to a Q&A format. I hope all of you have developed some questions that you can ask some of our panelists here for the next 20 minutes. I also want to invite you at 12 to come down and share some refreshments and grab a sandwich. And kind of mingle with our panelists if you get the chance. And so I'll hand it over to Rebecca. If you have a question for our panelists, please raise your hand and she'll come in and let you ask the question, and specify if it's for the whole panel or if you have a particular panelist in mind. So does anybody have a question right now? Okay. I see Robin up there.
Time to get some exercise. This is for Brandon or anybody else. So you said that you think generative AI can help your students or does help your students with sort of speculative, creative ideas, but so can you give us some examples? Because that would seem to contradict the idea that generative AI is just scraping up the common denominator of things that I've already thought of. So tell us more.
Thank you for the question. I think to add a little bit to that is that it doesn't just give us the answer right away. It doesn't just give us an idea right away. There's a lot more deep diving, a lot more questioning and whatnot. But if I ask a student to propose a current issue they have or an issue they have with a current dilemma they see in society, and I ask them then to let ChatGPT or Claude, as an example, generate an answer for them as though they are a visual artist creating, let's say, graphic design about speculative narratives. I ask them to then provide what the concern is. Any qualifying details they might want to add to that are obviously helpful, and as clear and concise as possible. What potentially is what was spat back out was kind of thinking along the lines of science fiction authors and nonfiction authors like Margaret Atwood. And also we can look at like early cybernetics and robotics, Asimov, people of that nature. It will throw back out, okay, you could potentially create a project around this topic. And the topic might be looking at gender equity in the year 2052, in which we have the government is run by cyborgs, or we have the intergalactic connectability, for lack of better terminology, to other species in the broader galaxy. So then it gives them the ability to think, oh, okay, I could start thinking about a narrative between human and non-human or human and alien species. And then they might start asking more questions. Well, I want to develop a typography that is something that is readable and legible to species that speak or read different languages. So it starts to give them ideas of, okay, how do I create a symbol-based language that is not based on any alphabet that we know on Earth? So it starts giving them then ideas about creating a method of communication. And is it something that's written? Is it something that's hologram based? Is it something that is in our skin and it uses RFID chips to send data to some other receiver? So the idea is, again, it's not giving them an answer, but they're prompting it with a question that is asking them to envision an alternative time, place, or way to address a problem. Does that make sense?
Any other questions? I'll say if not, I have one actually for the panel. So I know Professor Gorton, you talked on this specifically, but in terms of accessibility, how do you all see it being used within your classrooms and being able to have it so that it's accessible to everyone? Like what do you envision that as in your classrooms?
What a great question. I think by the fact that we're on a university campus that's connected to the internet and the webs and everything else out there, we have that built in. But it's when we don't have students living on campus, when we have students living in their cars, and then, oh, their car gets broken into, they lose their technology. How can they complete their work? And we need to be aware of that. That happened to one of my students. They didn't want to let anybody know, and I put some things together, but you still have to have that curiosity. But how do we make a difference? And what do we see as barriers? Because we are educated individuals supposedly here, sometimes I wonder about myself, we have a responsibility to figure out where those potential barriers might be. And I'll give you an example. My sister-in-law is the director of technology for a large public school district. And when the pandemic hit and they shut down, they, number one, needed technology. She placed the last order for Chromebooks in the country so they could send them home with their K through 6th grade kids. They had them for their 7 to 12. But then she's like, well, we got them the technology, but where's the internet? How do we keep our school bus drivers employed? Oh, they can go and park in neighborhoods where there's no infrastructure and provide internet. Oh, wait a minute, these kids are qualifying for meals. Oh, well, we'll keep our kitchen employed because they're making the meals that the school bus drivers are driving out to the neighborhoods to feed the kids so they can have some brain food and learn. We have the responsibility to look and see who are our constituents, who are our stakeholders, I think, in understanding. Because as a nurse, I can tell you, okay, you need to go home and you need to do this, this, and this. But in order to do that, you have to have access to the internet. What happens if you live, in that dead space between here and Casper, where there is no cell phone coverage? That's just a fact of life. People are blown away by that. But what do you need to know about the individuals that you're working with and for that can help them be successful? You have to be aware and you have to take the time to ask the questions. Did that answer your question?
Let me just kind of turn that question a bit. You asked about accessibility. I think there are some assignments in courses that you would have where AI would be clunky to use, awkward, for example, in an oral exam. So, and I have heard that somebody was on a podcast recently and they heard ticking when the person on the Zoom call was responding. They were basically reading and they were kind of outed because they were not their answers, they were the answers of AI. Okay, so, but I think in the oral exams, we have a professor at our school, Kate Hartman. She's in philosophy of religious studies, and she has shared a presentation about oral exams. And so, because I guess one of her courses is about Tibetan Buddhism, she knows about the tradition in Tibetan Buddhism for the I guess the monks to have oral exams. And when they do oral exams, it's not just, hey, we have a question for you. It's more confrontation. So the master would basically say, I don't believe that you have the answer. You can possibly have the answer. You can't give us this answer within, the allotted amount of time here. Here's the question, go for it. So it's kind of an in-your-face, challenging confrontation. So we might see some of our pedagogies change to a different type of exam. The law school, how they argue in class is what the Socratic method is what they're evaluated on to a great degree. Also in the Harvard Business School, they use cases exclusively. So there's actually a grader at the front of the classroom who's looking out at the audience and will grade the students on their responses and their grade on their oral contributions to the discussion. Interestingly, having taught the case method myself, sometimes a question from the audience is extremely valuable. It just pivots and turns the conversation in a very directive way. It doesn't have to be posed to the professor. It can be just general or even to one student. So I think we'll probably see that and maybe an appreciation for this oral discourse in our classrooms in the future.
I'm taking Dr. Hartman's Tibetan Buddhism course, and I can attest to the oral exams being phenomenal. It's really, really great methodology. As far as fudging data and that sort of, practice, how do you envision, when it comes to, in-class exams or in-class writing to prevent the use of AI for work, that's one thing. But when it comes to researchers themselves faking data, how do you envision us protecting against that? And is there work already being done to fight against that?
Was that for the whole panel or was that for anyone in particular? Anyone want to take that up? So am I hearing you correct? How are we going to protect ourselves against large scale data fabrication?
Yeah. Yes, just fraudulent research.
I'll make a response. After I received my PhD from Georgia Tech, I worked in the marketing research industry for 2 years. I was a number cruncher, a statistical analyst, a methods consultant was my title. Interestingly, in that role, they had us evaluate our time at the end of each day. 1/3 was spent in team governance. 1/3 was spent actually doing statistical analysis. 1/3 was spent in what we call client development. So that was sales, basically anticipating the needs, working, asking questions to your customers, basically, and developing things that way. If I return to the marketing research industry tomorrow, and I was at a big company, or even if I was a small company, I would make a point of having lunch with the accountants in the firm on that first day. Why would I do that? The accountants care about the integrity of their data, and they are hypervigilant about it. So basically, I want to identify myself with them. Now, later when I'm making presentations, and I tell my doc students this, that if there's problems with your data, don't present. You need to correct it. Don't get it up there and then have somebody say, well, why doesn't that agree with slide 4 in your deck? If you quibble about your data, you're lost and nobody will trust you in that event. And actually your reputation is tarnished and diminished to such that you're always questionable. So reputation matters, and it always has, but maybe perhaps in this new era of artificial intelligence, even more so. So again, I guess being very meticulous about your record keeping. And now our journals, basically, many of them, you have to submit your data and it will be there for years. So better make sure that data is the correct data and what you want, and it matches what you did in your analysis. And I also saw recently that there's like 2-page, they look like articles, but they're basically just descriptions of data. So kind of an introduction to a data set. So I think there's kind of journals or archival mechanisms or resources for giving some context for data that is actually posted for others to use after this. But I think the importance of reputation is going to continue to increase, and I guess that's my response here.
You're a psychologist. You know all
So-
about this.
Well, especially since we're some of the more egregious cases. I would say people is the answer, because so people like Data Colada and whatnot, they are able to spot these data sets and then dig into them. And there was a big case at the Harvard Business School. But I think the concern I had was in the future, AI is going to be able to produce these perfect data sets that won't be able to be caught through those methods. But some of the biggest cheaters, actually, like Staple, who's a social psychologist, he got caught basically because his own graduate students were like, where did this data come from? Oh, no, don't worry about it, blah, blah, blah. There's another case at WashU, Todd Braver, who's a cognitive neuroscientist, was suspicious of his own graduate student and then reported the student. So I think people is our last little hope, though the one thing I do worry about is because now there's so much online data collection, it'd be much easier for a PI to say, oh yeah, this data. And then the student can't say, oh, well, when did we collect this or whatever? Because it was like, oh, it was collected online. But so I think, yeah, this is going to be a lot more noise in science. So I think honestly, it's going to come down to replication, and people hopefully will be the bulwarks that save us. So that's my thought there.
And I'll echo, it's the people, it's the Institutional Review Board who is ensuring that this is an ethical research study so that the data collection happens. But then I also think it's a lot of the grants that are now requiring to put your data into a data warehouse. All of us is a data warehouse that you can, it's a repository and you can do secondary data analysis based on what's there. So I think the fact that it's going to be in the public, so to speak, but available to other researchers to look and say, can we replicate this or not? But that doesn't prevent you from creating 10 lines to fill your number of subjects that you needed. So I think it goes back to how do we teach individuals who are burgeoning researchers to say this, there's an ethical way to do this, and the consequences for unethical behavior are such, and we don't know that yet.
You know, the other thing I'll say also is, I was talking about slow research. I mean, we have gotten to the point we just, to be a successful like academic, to get the grants, and you just have to be a hyper publisher, et cetera. And that really incentivizes people to cheat. And I think and now the generative AI is going to make it easier. And so I don't think data repositories are going to necessarily be great, because if the data set is perfect, because now they can catch people because they can say, oh, look, this looks fishy or whatever. I mean, yes, you can have replication, and that's also a good catch. But again, if someone's really powerful, there've been many cases, Women's Health Initiative, where really powerful people dominate the literature. They squash papers that they don't like. Nature will do that. I mean, there are some really bad actors out there. So I think we have to try to dismantle that system to a certain extent. Like, so Peter Higgs, the Higgs boson, I think he only published like 12 papers in his lifetime. And he basically came out and said, oh, wow, if I was an academic today, I'd never have a job. And yes, some people do publish a lot, I think legitimately, but the incentive structure has gotten so bizarre that it just really now, just like with our students, like, well, why wouldn't you use AI to write your paper? I've got to get an A. Everyone else is doing it. I've got to get an A. And as long as we have that incentive structure in there, I don't blame them for doing that. I'd probably have done that too. So changing the incentive structure of science for like fewer, better papers, incentivize people for collecting larger, I don't know. So the people underneath, I think that communication thing, but even beyond that, I think you need to change the incentive structure. And that's, maybe that will never happen. So, we got a follow up there.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. Maybe the implication for scholars here, young scholars in particular, is you need to know your co-authors. And when they go, hey, I found the result, these days, you're probably going to need to go, okay, pass me the data. Let me see well, that's a different data set than what we had 2 days ago. How did you get more data? You know, these kind of questions. There was a time, it's a number of years ago, but I was working on a project with somebody who suddenly became hyper prolific. And this person works at a major university in our country now, but we were talking about things and the conversation, and I said, if what we say is true, we would identify a four-way interaction. Now, Meredith knows that. How many times have you seen that in the, okay. And so this guy who's now at a major university went back to his office, came back 20 minutes later and said, it's there. And yeah, so Meredith is saying, oh, and my heart sank because something told me when I was in the marketing research industry to identify a four-way interaction on the first or within 20 minutes, this is like kicking a 70-yard field goal in football. And so if you saw the Detroit Lions play whoever they are, the Texans or somebody this last weekend, the guy hit a 55-yard field goal at the end and ran all around the field. Okay, so with your colleagues, if they're getting like tremendous results and they're not spiking the air and pumping their fists, in our culture, something's wrong. Okay, so I think you need to be vigilant. So that's, I think, the lesson. So be hands-on. Okay.
Right. I do believe that's all the time we have for questions, but we do invite you guys to come and talk to the panelists here and ask any other questions that you might have. But for now, I'll turn it over to Dr. King.
Oh, no, that's it. Come on down, grab a sandwich, mingle with our panelists, have some questions in mind, and just kind of soak in the atmosphere. I do want to kind of point out, being a faculty fellow and an adjunct faculty in the School of Computing, that we are going to be introducing a Master of Science degree in artificial intelligence. That's going to be rolling out in the next few semesters. So keep an eye out for that. And if you're interested, please make sure to contact somebody in the School of Computing. You can contact Suresh or myself and kind of get some more information. And I'm just going to leave this up so that if you want to talk to me, or if you want to talk to get in touch and learn more about the School of Computing or anything else that we're going to be doing, I do want to remind everybody that this is our inaugural sort of proof of concept version of the experts panel. And I just really want to thank everybody again, all of our panelists, for coming here and sharing their perspectives, their knowledge, and their passion for understanding the underlying issues beyond the technology, understanding how we're all going to make sense of artificial intelligence in the years to come. And what else was I going to say? Just come on down and grab a sandwich. Since this was proof of concept, and we'd really like to be able to do this again and make it better and better and better each time that we do it, there is a survey that we have. That's the QR code there. And we'd really appreciate your participation in the survey. And if you are a faculty member, or if you're a student even, get ready, because we're planning to have a wide spectrum of perspectives that we invite to come and share with us. And so don't be surprised if at some point you are invited to come and participate yourself and serve as a panelist in our expert panel series. So I want to thank you all again. Thank you for coming, and come down. I know you're hungry. So